Hey everyone, it's been a while since we last covered Genshin lore, and with the release of the Fontaine teaser and the Final Feast trailer, I figured it was the perfect time to go over some of the lore for this region. After doing a bit of digging and research, I was able to discover a few interesting things regarding Fontaine and its characters. Given the wide variety of topics, I created a list of 10 interesting things and theories about Fontaine that you may not know about. The first thing I wanted to go over is the time period that Fontaine is based off of because it will help give us some context and insights into this new region. Based on my research, it appears that the French Industrial Revolution and the Belle Epoque served as inspiration for the design of Fontaine. All these movements or eras took place in the 19th century, and I'll briefly provide a quick overview of each of these movements and their connection to Fontaine. According to most scholars and historians, the Industrial Revolution started in 1760, but that's from the perspective of the United Kingdom. Unfortunately for France, their Industrial Revolution would not begin till around the 1830s. This is due to several reasons. First, there was the French Revolution of 1789 that threw the country into turmoil. This was then followed up with the Napoleonic Wars, which lasted till 1815. Once these conflicts ended, France underwent major political and economic changes that would allow for industrialization. One of the biggest contributors to the industrialization of France was the introduction of the steam engine. This piece of technology resulted in the rise of factories that transitioned France's economy from mostly agriculture to manufacturing industries. While this brought in new profits for France, it also had its downsides. Many of the newly built factories exploited the poor through low pay and poor working conditions, not to mention child labor. Additionally, the heavy use of coal to power the steam engines resulted in heavy pollution. Lastly, the inequality between the rich and the poor would only grow worse as the profits generated from these factories only lined the pockets of the rich. When it comes to Fontaine, we can see elements of the Industrial Revolution reflected in its design. First of all, Fontaine is known for its technological advancements, and given its association with hydro, it seems likely that this nation relies on steam power as a source of energy. Additionally, in a few shots of the underworld, we see various pipes lining the sewers, which could be a way of transporting steam. Lastly, there is this dynamic between the overworld and underworld, which I think symbolizes the inequality of the French Industrial Revolution. In 1871, as the Franco-Prussian War came to an end, it ushered in a new age of prosperity known as the Belle Epoque. The Belle Epoque was essentially a second industrial revolution where France experienced extensive economic growth and major scientific breakthroughs. The key driver for this prosperity was the development of steel, which allowed France to update its railways and infrastructure. In turn, this also allowed France to create large cities, as new developments in machinery reduced the reliance on human labor and allowed for greater efficiency in agriculture. These improvements were huge for the upper class, but also supported the small but growing middle class. Amenities such as running water, gas, and electricity became more widely available. Aside from these advancements in technology, there was also intense growth in the fields of art and literature. New styles of art emerged, like Art Nouveau, which changed the look and feel of cities and towns. But more famously in France, the Parisian theater and cabaret scene exploded. New and more modern plays emerged on topics that were once considered taboo. Additionally, artists and performers of all kinds would gather at the cabarets to introduce audiences to new forms of entertainment. Unfortunately, hidden beneath all this extravagance was a very ugly truth. This sudden growth only widened the gap between the rich and the poor. The upper and middle classes were able to live extravagant lifestyles, while the lower class still lived in poor, cramped conditions. What made the situation worse was that the upper class harbored feelings of animosity towards the lower and middle classes. The upper classes essentially felt that they were superior to the lower classes, and they didn't want to share their prosperity with others. There was also a lot of tension between the elites of every country, which would eventually result in the outbreak of World War I, bringing the Belle Epoque to an end. Once again, there are a lot of connections to be made between Fontaine and this period of history. The extravagant style and architecture of Fontaine are extremely reminiscent of the Belle Epoque. Also, I wanted to mention that the architecture from Fontaine reminds me of Demacia from League of Legends. Both of these cities share these really elegant buildings constructed of stone, and I just love the aesthetic. Anyways, as we discussed earlier, it appears there exists some sort of inequality between the overworld and the underworld of Fontaine. Like with the Belle Epoque, the extravagance of the overworld of Fontaine hides the ugly truth of the underworld of Fontaine. It's similar to the conflict between Zaun and Piltover from League of Legends and Belobog and the underworld from Honkai Star Rail. Lastly, just like the Belle Epoque, the arts play a large role in Fontaine's society. Specifically, I think the theater of Fontaine will play a large role in the upcoming Archon quest. As you all probably know, we get a hint of this from the Final Feast trailer, where Arlecchino talks about the actors putting on a show to mesmerize the audience. The second thing that we know about Fontaine is that the Archon quest is called Masquerade of the Guilty. Masquerade Balls are events where everyone is dressed in extravagant costumes with their face hidden behind a mask. These were parties that were thrown during the Carnival season and were very popular amongst royalty and the upper classes. The masquerade parties would often involve dancing and excessive indulgence of food and alcohol. Additionally, most masquerades would involve a game where the participants try to figure out the identity of other guests. A trope in media that is often portrayed is that of an assassination occurring during a masquerade. To my surprise, this trope is actually grounded in reality. In 1892, Gustav III of Sweden was assassinated at a masquerade ball by a nobleman. I guess this is where we got the idea of murder mystery masquerade parties. Anyways, this got me wondering if we will have to go through something similar in the Archon quest for Fontaine. Maybe there's an attempted assassination that the traveler needs to investigate. From what I gathered from the Final Feast trailer, Lyney says that not everything is as it seems, which plays into the themes of hiding behind masks at a masquerade. Next, I wanted to talk about the court system of Fontaine. In France, the courts are split into two systems or jurisdictions. The judicial courts deal with criminal law and civil law, and the administrative courts deal with public law. That being said, the highest court in France is called the Court of Cassation. This court is composed of 6 chambers, which are the commercial chamber, the labor chamber, the criminal chamber, and the 3 civil chambers. Each of these chambers has its own presiding judge or president. At the very top of the Court of Cassation sits the first president, who is the head of the court. In Fontaine, their equivalent to the first president is Chief Justice Nouviet. Presumably, this means that Nouviet is in charge of determining what cases the court will hear and ensuring that the presiding judges adhere to the law. In the Final Feast trailer, we only see Nouviet presiding over the Court of Fontaine, but given what we just went over, there could potentially be 6 more justices that we will meet in the game. Next, I wanted to talk about the Oceanids. We know that the Oceanids were fervent followers of the former Hydro Archon. In ancient Greek mythology, the Oceanids were the daughters of the Titans Tethys and Oceanus. They were seen as holy beings and symbols of protection. Many Greek sailors would honor and worship the Oceanids, asking for their protection as they explored the seas. Similarly, the former Hydro Archon was associated with purity, which is likely a property she also transferred to the Oceanids. After the death of the former Hydro Archon, Focalors would ascend and become the new Hydro Archon. However, the Oceanids were less than impressed with the god of justice and refused to support her. Most of the Oceanids would leave Fontaine, going on a pilgrimage to spread the purity and love that they were shown by the former Archon. Based on this information, it sounds like the Oceanids question the intentions and purity of Focalors. It could be that they sense the ulterior motives of Focalors, or they know that her ideal of justice is just a show she puts on for Celestia. Regardless, the most powerful of the Oceanids, Rodea of Locke, would settle down near Chingsa village. At some point, the Hydro Archon would dispatch younger Locke folk to assassinate Rodea. These attempts would fail, and the Traveler would help fight off the assassins. Based on these events, there are a few things we can learn about Fontaine. First of all, there seems to be a faction of Locke folk that remain loyal to Focalors. Why they remain loyal is a question we don't have the answer to yet, but maybe they were born after the death of the former Hydro Archon, so they don't have that connection to purity that the Oceanids like Rodea do. The second thing that we learn is that Focalors seems to be a very proud Archon. The fact that she sent assassins to kill Rodea tells me that she doesn't like to be defied or chastised. It's likely that Focalors views the lack of support from the Oceanids and the Locke folk as a form of betrayal, which is why she wants to assassinate Rodea. Now that we're on the topic, let's talk about Focalors, the god of justice and the current Hydro Archon. According to the Ars Goetia, Focalors is a great duke of hell that has the power to control the wind and the sea. Apparently, Focalors had hoped to return to heaven after 1,000 years, but was tricked. Similar to her counterpart in the Ars Goetia, Focalors can manipulate the Hydro element. Additionally, in the Teyvat chapter storyline preview, Dainsleif tells us that the god of justice knows not to make an enemy of the divine. The lore entry for the Varunata Lazarite gemstone also suggests this idea, as Focalors brags about her magnificence and purity. Because of this, it makes me think that Focalors is afraid of Celestia and that she wants to prove to Celestia that Fontaine is the most worthy nation. I don't blame her though, especially if your nation sits right below Celestia. It's probably a good idea to play by the rules. Otherwise, you're gonna get yeeted and deleted. Another interesting connection to the Ars Goetia is that Focalors is a sibling of Oribos. Though it might not mean anything, there could potentially be a connection between Orobashi and the Hydro Archon. If there is a connection between the two, I wonder if it has something to do with the monster we see at the beginning of the Final Feast trailer. But I could be wrong, and it's just a coincidence that Oribos and Focalors are siblings in the Ars Goetia. Moving on, let's talk about Lyney and Lynette. At this point, it's pretty much confirmed that the three siblings, Lyney, Lynette, and Fremine, are working for Arlecchino. We know that the House of the Hearth, run by Arlecchino, is an orphanage that trains children to be sleeper agents for the Fatui. As part of their disguise, the twins work as magicians in Fontaine while being spies for the Fatui. Interestingly, and something fun that I discovered, is that spies and magicians have quite a long history. Many intelligence agencies throughout the world have hired magicians to help train their operatives in the art of deception. For example, the CIA hired magician John Mulholland to write a guide on the art of trickery. In some cases, intelligence agencies have been rumored to have directly hired magicians as spies. In France, a magician was hired to quell a rebellion in Algeria by disproving the magic of the local religious leaders. Famously, Harry Houdini was rumored to have been a spy for the United States and Great Britain during World War I. These are just a few examples of magicians working for intelligence agencies, and something that could have served as the inspiration for Lyney and Lynette. While we're on the topic of the Fatui, it appears that Arlecchino is the Fatui Harbinger assigned to Fontaine. In the Commedia dell'arte, Arlecchino, or the Harlequin, is known for their role as being a mischievous servant that disobeys their master to pursue their love interest Columbina. If we are to believe that this trope will play a role in the story, it makes me wonder a few things. The first thing that comes to mind is whether or not Columbina will play a role in what unfolds in Fontaine. At the current moment, we don't have any indication that Columbina is stationed in Fontaine, but that could very well change. That being said, it's also possible that Arlecchino is putting on a show to impress Columbina as opposed to the Tsaritsa. This takes us to the next topic regarding Arlecchino's loyalties. Amongst the Fatui, Arlecchino is known as the Knave, which is a word used to describe someone who is prone to being dishonest. If we take all this into consideration, it seems to suggest that Arlecchino may not be fully loyal to the Tsaritsa. We get some confirmation that Arlecchino's loyalties may lie elsewhere from a voice line from Child.
Look, I've got nothing against people who have their own agendas. I myself joined the Fatui to get more experience in combat. But I don't like her at all. If she stood to benefit from betraying others, she'd turn against the Tsaritsa in a heartbeat. There isn't a sane bone in her body.
Based on this quote, it seems very likely that Arlecchino may betray the Tsaritsa at some point in the future. Whatever the reason is, it remains to be seen, but given that she controls the House of the Hearth and all of its sleeper agents, she could prove to be a formidable foe for the Fatui. Next up, I want to talk about Egeria, a character that we don't actually get to see in the Final Feast trailer. Based on my research, Egeria could be based on two things. Number 1, Egeria could be based on a nymph from Roman legends who helped the second emperor of Rome establish its framework of laws. Or the more likely alternative is that Egeria is based on a Western European woman that set off on a pilgrimage of the Holy Land around the year 380 AD. In a journal titled The Travels of Egeria, Egeria recounts her journey to the Holy Land and the sites that she visited during her pilgrimage. It is rumored that Egeria originally came from the Rhone Valley, which is a region of France famous for its wines. From there, she was set off to various holy sites such as Mount Sinai, Jerusalem, the Burning Bush, and the Mountain of Elijah, for example. As she arrived at each site, she would pray, read the Bible, and speak with the local clerics. By visiting these sites and participating in these customs, Egeria hoped to deepen her faith. That being said, her pilgrimage has captured the attention of scholars and historians. What made her pilgrimage particularly fascinating is that she traveled alone, which was not common for women of her time. In the Final Feast trailer, Egeria talks about the original sin and how the curtain call has come for the sinners. Given the real-life inspiration behind her character and the religious references made in the trailer, I think Egeria may have something to do with Celestia. Maybe she's a messenger for the heavenly principles or someone who is in communication with Celestia. Whatever it is, she seems very suspicious to me. What are your thoughts on Egeria? Sound off in the comments section below. Next, I wanted to briefly talk about the original sin and its context with regards to Fontaine. According to Christianity, the original sin is the idea that the disobedience of mankind in the Garden of Eden has eternally tainted the entire human race. As a result, humanity is condemned and in need of salvation. In the Final Feast trailer, Egeria says the following:
"The original sin is the fairest. Everyone sinks. Make the most of the final feast, because for the sinners, the curtain call has come."
Unfortunately, I'm not entirely comfortable making theories around what the original sin is, but based on this trailer, no one is exempt from the original sin. It's interesting because this is the opposite of what Focalors says about Fontaine. My ideals have no stains. I must correct you. People here bear no sins in the eyes of the gods. Only laws in the tribunal can judge someone. They can judge even me, so praise my magnificence and purity. In contrast to this quote from Focalors, Egeria says that no one is exempt from the original sin. Pair that with the theme of putting on a good show to mask what hides below, it seems to suggest that Fontaine is not as pure as Focalors claims it to be. With the Final Feast or Last Supper quickly approaching, it sounds like the Day of Judgment will be quickly approaching Fontaine. Last but not least, and according to the internet, this is how you're supposed to pronounce his name, let's talk about Wriothesley. In the Final Feast trailer, when we pan over to Wriothesley, Lyney talks about how every part of the show is carefully controlled. We then see Wriothesley read through a few documents in a room with black walls. After a few seconds, we zoom out and travel through a pipe, presumably returning to the surface of Fontaine. To me, this indicated that Wriothesley is probably involved in some sort of clandestine operation involving control over Fontaine. So, like any lore YouTuber, I did some digging and discovered something called the Cabinet Noir or Black Room. In France, during the 1700s and 1800s, the Cabinet Noir was a government intelligence organization typically based in post offices that was tasked with monitoring correspondence between individuals in the country. Any form of communication like letters, telegraphs, or packages were inspected by the Cabinet Noir. This government organization did this to ensure domestic security and prevent any rebellions. Given that Wriothesley seemed to be analyzing documents hidden away in a room deep below Fontaine, that got me wondering if he is part of an organization like the Cabinet Noir. This would allow for the complete control of the Hydro Archon over the City of Justice and ensure that any criminal would be caught. But what do you guys think? Is it possible that Wriothesley is part of a Cabinet Noir-esque organization? And that is everything I have for the lore on Fontaine. I'm really sorry I haven't been doing a whole lot of Genshin content. Right now I'm deep into my series on the lore of the Aeons from Honkai Star Rail, but hopefully once that's done we can get back to making more videos on Genshin. I'm trying to strike a balance between these two games since I love the lore from both. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment for the algorithm, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss out on my next video. Catch you all later. Peace!